Welcome into Courtside Seats with Kroger,
a Charlotte Hornets podcast.
Here he is, Chris Kroeger.
This one's a pretty fun one because I don't think we've done this yet. So we have the radio voice now, which is still weird for me to say, the radio voice of your Hornets, and then the TV voice of your Hornets. Say hi, Eric Collins. How you doing?
Hey, I'm thrilled, and I'm thrilled that you have the same type of weirdness with saying voice of, because it's always still Steve Martin to me.
It's crazy.
So, when people always say Eric Collins, voice of the Hornets. No. The TV voice of the Hornets, for years it was, Steve Martin is the voice of the Hornets, and now I'm willing to split it with you, all right? I'm the TV voice, you're the radio voice.
I know, I'm completely fine with that, because I think it does take two men to live up to that title, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day, Steve Martin is still the voice of the Hornets, but we can take a little small part of it with radio and TV.
It's a big part of our organization's history to now say, for 30 years of NBA basketball, 28 years of NBA basketball, 30 years since the origination of the team, we had one seminal voice on TV and radio. And that's a big deal, because if you talk about the great organizations all across sports, NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, you have the one guy. That means you've done something, right? There's some staying power. Yeah. There's longevity. It speaks to your franchise. It speaks to that person. And gosh, you worked with one with Vin Scully we can talk about. But yeah, Steve, for 30 years, he's been the guy. So I tell you, this is part of that maturation process, I think, of our organization.
I think one of the cool things, maybe the coolest thing about Steve Martin is, even though he had so much going on and so much history here with this organization, he was the most accessible guy. Mm-hmm. He was the guy who welcomed me probably more than anyone else when I came to town. And you and I, we've been in the business for a while, and I've met a lot of different people and a lot of people who have done stuff and accomplished stuff. And there's a lot of people who have accomplished maybe an eighth of what Steve Martin accomplished, who carried themselves a lot differently than Steve did. So I was very appreciative of the man that he was, not just the broadcaster that he was.
Let's have some fun really quick. So he called me last week. You might have talked to him more recently. He called me last week. Hey, Chris, it's Steve. I said, hey, Steve, what are you doing? He said, oh, nothing. I'm just back in town. He goes up to Maine during the summer. And we were taking bets in the office. I said, what do you guys think Steve's doing in retirement right now? And so we had grilling out. We had reading. We had all sorts of stuff all over the map. So I know the answer because I asked him what he was doing. You know Steve well. What do you think Steve was doing when he called me last week?
He probably was checking off his honey-do list. His wife was probably sending him here and there, trying to pick up groceries and mow the lawn or do something.
That's exactly what he was doing. I'm not kidding. That's exactly what he was doing. He was like, yeah, I came back in town. I got stuff to get caught up on. And he said, I don't mind doing that right now. Retirement's treating him well, I think.
Yeah, there's worse things in the world than spending a Tuesday morning driving to the bank and doing your business.
Yeah, everything's fine. Yeah. So it's good to see you. And I don't know, any advice? You're a man who's succeeded Steve Martin, so I kind of know a guy. So any advice? Any advice for that guy?
Hey, you've been in the mix. I think no one knows this town as well as you have. With all the different jobs that you've had and the chances to hold a microphone. It's Hornets basketball. It should be the best part of your day. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to be just fine. Actually, I know you're going to be just fine. I'm a big fan of your work.
This is 4 years for you.
It's gone quick. I came in the same time period as Nick Batum, mm-hmm. Frank Kaminsky, and Jeremy Lamb. So we're kind of all in this together, which I think is pretty cool. And we've seen some winning and we've seen some not winning. I'm excited about this year. I know this sounds like you've heard this before, but each of the last 2 years, the Hornets were just so close. The failure to close out close games, the failure just to kind of get over that little hump, it was a huge swing in the record. And I don't think that the Hornets are that far away from getting back to where they were my first year in town when they were a 48-win team and they're the third best record in the Eastern Conference. I love Steve Clifford and his staff. I thought they did a good job of getting the Hornets from point A to B. But I'm looking forward to seeing what a new coaching staff will do, and because I don't think there's that much that needs to change to get the Hornets from 36 wins to 48 wins. It really was just a couple of bounces and figuring out a way to play together the final 2 minutes of the game. There's so many games in the NBA, as you know, that are decided in the final 2 minutes. And the lion's share of those games over the last 2 years, the Hornets came on the wrong end of. So a new voice, a new style, a new energy. I think that could be what this team needs to pick up those 12 games that they've been missing the last couple of years.
Yeah, it was funny. You're a trivia guy. So I'll throw this out there to you. I was looking this up yesterday. Average age of our roster relative to the rest of the NBA, saying if one was the youngest, 30th being the oldest, where do you think the Hornets rank in terms of average composite age of our roster right now?
Wow. Well, you do have some. Well, you got rid of Dwight, but Marvin's still around. I bet
Tony
it'd be pretty
Parker
young.
Guy.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
okay, but I still I still think of those because Malik is still super young, and Dwayne is still young, and
MKG
with the draft
sneaky young.
Sure, my goodness. So you said what's the is one
if
the
one
oldest?
Was the youngest? If you said going
okay,
1
I'm going to
through
say
30,
the Hornets are 12.
You're not far off. They're tied for 9th, actually.
Huh. Okay.
Average composite age 25.6 years. They're a young. This is a young roster we got here.
It really is.
And I think most people, I don't know if you went around the NBA, because you hear people say, oh, well, this team is maybe dealing with salary cap constraints, or what's their ceiling, what's their floor, all the stuff that people love to talk about evaluating the NBA. I don't think that a lot of people realize this is a pretty young roster overall. There's a lot of young pieces that, to your point, with a new coaching staff, a new direction, you're trying to lift the tide a little bit.
I think not only the youth, but I also am excited about the upward development of some of the veterans.
Mm-hmm.
Nick Batum is not the youngest guy on the roster, but I think that Nick has.
He's in the prime of his career, though.
I think he can go a big step this year.
Yeah.
I think last year was kind of a weird dynamic, coming back from an injury, missing the first month of the season, and then kind of trying to fit in with Dwight Howard. And I think that Nick, with the talent that he has, the skill set that he has, I really look forward to how he's deployed with the new coaching staff, the kind of maybe some San Antonio tweaks. You think about how the Spurs played for the last 15 years. They have had stars, but it's stars that play within a system. And one night it was Ginobili, the next night it was David Robinson, then it was Tim Duncan, Tony Parker. You didn't know who you were going to get. And I think that Nick Batum would have blended beautifully into those San Antonio teams over the last decade. And now kind of the San Antonio way, or at least parts of it, are going to come here to town. I think that's a great thing for Nick. And I also love the fact that his best friend in the world is going to be on the roster and watching him. And as much as Nick is a pro, and no doubt about it, he's been in the league for 9 years, he cares. But I think the simple fact of having your good buddy there, who is someone that you've always considered to be a mentor, someone's watching you, someone working out with you, someone who you want to impress, even at that base level, I think that's going to be a good thing for everyone involved.
So what's your offseason look like? When the season ended on April 10th in Indianapolis against the Pacers, it's been, now 5 months. That seems kind of crazy to believe. But in the last 5 months, what does Eric Collins do? You got to take some downtime. But
a little bit of downtime just because, I need to reintroduce myself to my wife and my kids. That was great. Got a chance to take kids to school and be around and make dinners and grocery shop. That was good.
Are you a good cook, by the way?
I'm a good recipe follower.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah,
that's a starting
I can
point.
Follow directions.
Okay.
Yeah, I know the difference between a tablespoon and a teaspoon. In May, I did a little bit of college softball. I did the NCAA tournament. I did a regional out in Seattle, Washington, which I loved. I filled in for Chip Carey doing Atlanta Braves baseball. He's got some twins who are graduating from high school, and I got an opportunity to work some Atlanta Braves baseball, which I think is just, if someone told me for the rest of my life I could do 3 baseball games a summer for the next 20 years, I'd say I'd live the absolutely dreamy life. I'm a huge baseball fan, and getting a chance to go to Major League ballparks and sit in a booth and just talk ball for 3 hours. Actually, to me, one of the great joys in the world is just preparing for a baseball game.
Really?
You're thinking about names, and you're kind of going down a rabbit hole, and you're like, oh my God, I forgot all about Nick Esaski. Oh, he retired because he had vertigo. That never happens. Oh, Nick Esaski, he had 1 year where he had 100 runs batted in, and he had 1 sacrifice fly. How many times does that happen? And so you just find yourself losing hours at a time, going down memory lane and thinking of things that you find interesting, and hopefully that other people find interesting. So I did not only the Atlanta Braves game in May, but I do a little bit of Fox Sports baseball. So I've had a couple of games around the country doing MLB. I'm going to do college football. I've got 5 weeks of college football on FS1, Fox Sports 1.
Good for
you. Got my first one coming up 2 days. I'm going to be leaving tonight to go to Minneapolis. I've got the Fresno State Bulldogs and the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
Hold on. Jeff Tedford's the head coach for Fresno State now?
Wow.
Is that right?
Now in his second year. Impressive.
Okay. Minnesota is now coached by old Row Your Boat. Why is his name on the tip of my tongue right now?
His first name's not Pajamas. It's PJ.
PJ Fleck.
Yes.
Row the boat.
That's right. And they were Disappointment last year.
Yeah, came from Western Michigan to Minnesota.
Yes.
I got a limited. I'm a college football junkie. I was in school when we beat Michigan. Maybe that jump started it. Ever since then, I'm in love with this crazy world of college football because I feel like there's nothing like college football.
It isn't. Your season could end the first week of the season.
Yeah, it's wild, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For the elite teams, the top 8 teams, you could lose in August and you have nothing to play for basically the rest of the year.
And I love the cultures of it, EC. Like, I love for you, you'll get to go to Minneapolis, Big Ten country, your neck of the woods from where you're from. Every area of the country's got a different cultural experience around the sport, and there's nothing else like that in this country.
Actually, one of the things that I'm looking forward to at some point when I have a little bit of downtime in the fall is experience ACC football. I spent 6 years at the Big Ten Network, and so I've been to every single Big Ten venue. I was at ESPN for a long time. I've been to every single SEC venue. I've been to a handful of ACC college football stadiums, but I've never been to Wallace Wade, which is not supposed to be like the greatest place in the world, but I'd love to see a game there.
It's been renovated now, too. It looks incredible. Yeah.
I did a game at Virginia many, many moons ago in Scott Stadium. I don't know if that generally gets listed on one of the best places to watch a game, but I loved it.
It's gorgeous.
The changing colors with all the oranges and the browns and just in a perfect part of campus.
Charlottesville, by the way, sneaky underrated town.
Oh, yeah.
On the Eastern Seaboard.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great little getaway spot for like 2-3 days. Charlottesville's a great spot.
I did a game. I've only been to Charlottesville for, a day and a half, and I remember the game ended. It was Virginia Tech versus Virginia. It would have been like 2003 or 4. Matt Schaub was the quarterback.
Wow.
Heath Miller was his tight end. I can't remember who Virginia Tech had, but the minute that the game ended, we had a police escort to get us to the airport. It was back when ABC used to do big-time football.
Yep.
And I was just kind of like a young kid. I was getting an audition at ABC. And work with Ray Bentley. And the minute the game ended, all of a sudden these troopers just descended upon us and got us into these cars. And we had these red light flashing. And we went through Charlottesville probably 95 miles an hour just to get to the airport. Oh, my goodness. We made it with like an hour to spare. But it was the most important thing in those troopers' lives, is this police escort to get us to the Charlottesville airport.
How important did you feel?
Oh, my goodness. If my dad could have been around, he wouldn't have believed it. He had a son who was getting a police escort to get to an airport, as opposed to police escort to get out of town and never come back.
All I did was call a game, but no, we got to get you. We got to get you here.
Yeah. College football, sometimes the announcer is king.
You have a really interesting path to where you've gotten, and it started, Cleveland? You're a Clevelander? Is that
Clevelander, yes. Okay. Born and raised in Cleveland. I was Cleveland Heights, and I was probably 6 miles away from downtown Cleveland, and we could get down to Municipal Stadium in 15 minutes. And so frequently, my mom, who was the biggest sports fan, my dad actually couldn't tell you 3 Cleveland Cavaliers in the history of the organization. But my mom knew everything about everyone. And she always had the game on the radio, and we'd be having dinner at 6 o'clock, and we'd be cleaning up from dinner at 6:30, and my mom would say, "Eric, want to go to the ball game tonight?" And we'd just go, and wouldn't even have thought about buying tickets, just kind of get down there, and right when the national anthem's being sung, walk in and spend the next 3 hours of my night there, just me and my mom.
How could you explain to people that understand, because now it's almost become a running joke, it's become almost a stereotype of a stereotype, but being the existence of a Cleveland sports fan, what is that? How could you explain that? What's that like to those who don't know?
So much of Cleveland. I was born, in my formative years were during the 70s, and that's back when, the river caught on fire, which actually is not that rare of a thing. The Chicago River caught on fire, and they wrote songs about it back in the day. But anyway, the river caught on fire in Cleveland. The mayor, his hair caught on fire. The city was bankrupt. There's a lot of different things that were unique in Cleveland during that time period, and Johnny Carson was, the king of the late night airwaves, and he loved making Cleveland jokes, and it kind of picked up some steam. It's an old Rust Belt city town, and a lot of comings and goings, and probably had better days, back when certain technology hadn't come around. Anyway, so Cleveland, maybe more so than any other place that I've been to, Clevelanders base their self-worth on how well the teams are playing. And forever, seemingly, the Cleveland Indians were a second division team. The Cavaliers were not much of anything. They just came into the league in the late 60s, so they were not much of anything. The Browns actually were the team we all kind of held pride in. Mm-hmm. But now Cleveland's actually going pretty well. Everyone's on a top tick. The Cavaliers have been to the finals, last 3 years. They won the championship a couple of years ago, and the Indians are perennial contenders now. The Browns maybe are starting to turn the corner.
Seems like it, right? There's hope.
But the Cavs have already got their championship, so I kind of think that everyone's moved on. It'll always be a Browns town, Cleveland. The Indians are definitely second. The Cavaliers are third, and I actually don't think that, with LeBron leaving, I don't think it was that big of a deal in Cleveland the second time he moved because of the championship, and because of the fact that it's not necessarily a huge basketball town. So we're happy Clevelanders are to devote their attention back to the Indians and the Browns.
Do you take offense to the Cleveland jabs that come up all the time? Or do you
I did for many, many moons. Yeah. I did. And I always felt terrified down deep in my soul because much like when the Hornets relocated, the Browns relocated during my lifetime.
You?
Oh, my God. It hurt me to the core. I didn't believe that it was. I thought it was just all rumors. There's just no way because they'd sold out Municipal Stadium, 80,000 for years and years and years. It's a league where you just print money. It's like, how could this owner not make any money? So when that happened, that just cut me to the core. But anyway, nowadays, Cleveland is on such a good run. It's a great food town. It's actually a really cool place to go and just visit. And I don't have much in terms of relatives in Cleveland anymore, but when we do go back for Hornets games, it really washes up nice. There's a lot of fun things to do. And so I used to hold my self-worth with the Indians, the Browns, and the Cavaliers, and now not so much, just because I think that city is back to where it needs to be.
But that's interesting because I'm the same way because at my age, I've grown up with not knowing what life was like without the Hornets and the Panthers in town. And I remember what it was like back then. And so when I hear people say, well, Charlotte's a fair weather sports town, or, they don't really care about sport. There might be in any broad stereotype, there's always some level of truth. Okay, that's the way this is the way it's worked. But the big picture to me is, this is where I think it's really fun and exciting. People my age and younger, they don't know anything different. All they know is Charlotte as a pro sports town. They don't know Charlotte as a sleepy little town in the Bible Belt. All they know is Charlotte is, we've got the Hornets and we've got the Panthers and we've been to 2 Super Bowls and the Hornets have had great players come through and now we're trying to get it back again. And, that used to be the talk of the NBA with the sellout streak and 162 consecutive games. And so I've seen this city grow. And when people say, they're transplants and people root for other teams, older people do. But people my age and younger, they're raising their kids to be Hornets fans, and they're raising their kids to be Panthers fans. And so it takes generations to build that up. So I get defensive now of Charlotte because I don't think that's true. People my age, as this city grows, will look 30, 40 years from now, and then we'll have 4th, 5th generation sports fans in the city.
It's pretty cool.
It's exciting, right?
Yeah. I feel like a teacher sometimes. That my kids are elementary and middle school age, and sometimes their friends will come over and they'll wear Panthers gear, and it's Panthers this and Panthers that. And I'm like, well, hold on here. You understand that the Panthers are here and the Panthers are thriving because of what Hornets fans did back in the late 80s and the early 90s with the sellout streak, with the way that the Coliseum was just rocking, with the colors, with the international identity. The Hornets really had a great thing going for a long period of time, and that's what validated Charlotte as a pro sports team, in my opinion. And that's what made the Panthers' entry into the NFL such a smooth transition.
I actually talked to Rex Chapman about this. The thing I always, and I still to this day, resonates with me more than anything about the original Hornets run, and it's a tiny thing to a lot of people, but it's not to me, the fact that the uniform said Charlotte. No other team in the NBA, home and road, had both of their uniforms read the city name. Maybe one did, but you'd always have the mascot on the other uniform, not the Hornets. It always said Charlotte. If you had the teal, it said Charlotte. If you had the white, it said Charlotte. If you wore the purple, it said Charlotte. And that validated our city. I think maybe even subconsciously to people across the country of, they're not the Hornets, they're the Charlotte Hornets.
I remember conversely growing up in Cleveland that the Indians one year had Indians on their home and road jerseys. And everyone, because back then they were drawing 3,000 fans, and everyone read that as, oh my goodness, they're no longer associated with Cleveland. They're getting ready to move. We got to figure something going on here. What's the problem?
What's going on?
And so everyone started to panic and bite their fingernails even more than normal.
Yeah. There's something intrinsic about a city. Like you said, Cleveland maybe does it to an extreme. I think Boston does it to an extreme. Philly does it to an extreme, where you tie your self-worth into sports just at an extreme level, but there's something to valuing your city based off of how your sports teams do, and that's fun. That's why we live and die with these sports teams. It's why we get so torn up when we lose a close game or when you win a great game, and that's the power of sports. There's nothing else like it. You don't get that way about, I mean, maybe once in a blue moon about a political race or something like that, or a great cause, but nothing brings people together the way sports brings people together. Nothing does.
It's passion, and sports is also one of those places too, on any level, whether you're playing it, whether or not you're just watching it as a fan, you're just hanging out with a buddy, your wife or whatever, you're allowed to compliment other people. You think about that. How many other times throughout the course of your day do you compliment someone else? Do you go out of your way to say, wow, that was wonderful, thank you. But it's easy during sports to slap someone on the shoulder, or hit someone on the leg, or pat someone on the back when you're playing and say, hey, good shot, or good pass, or just watching as a fan. You get excited, and all of a sudden you find yourself holding someone else's hand when you're watching the game, or you're just sitting closer to someone, or you're both nervous together, and you're sharing it together. So I think that's one of the great things about sports. It's one of the few places where it's socially acceptable just to be happy and compliment and love someone else.
When you were listening to these radio broadcasts at home as a kid and going to these games, did you know back then you were falling in love with the idea of becoming a sports broadcaster, or did that happen later in life?
Actually, I got this wonderful picture that I just discovered looking through an old scrapbook. It would have been 1977, and I was 8 years old, and I went to a winter function. The Cleveland Indians were having something, a get-together. And the longtime Cleveland Indians radio announcer was a guy named Herb Score, played for the Indians and then was their broadcaster for at least 30 years. So Herb Score was there wearing this typical Cleveland mid-70s leisure suit. And I come up to him, and my mom had captured the picture of this Polaroid, and I came up to him, and I had a full head of hair, just this big afro, and I had Cleveland Indians wristbands on. It was like December. I had a Cleveland Indians shirt with the big Chief Wahoo logo right in the middle of it. Herb Score and myself in the picture. I thought the picture itself was pretty cool, but then I looked on the back of it, my mom had written in her cursive saying, 2 broadcasters getting together. So when I was 8 years old, my mom, for some reason, thought I was going to be a broadcaster.
Does that still give you chills to think about that?
When I saw it, it absolutely blew my mind. It was one of the eerily awesome things.
That's so
ever.
Cool, Eric.
I was a huge sports fan every single season. Baseball, basketball, football. I would play whatever, and that's just kind of who I was. But from an early level, just because I also like to read about the games as well, I was a big biography reader. For some reason, I always knew that the odds of me doing anything in terms of professional sports as a player were infinitesimal. I was a decent athlete, but nothing great. But I always had this really ultra-realistic view of myself. But I also knew that I wanted to be involved in sports. So the back of my mind, even when I was young, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I knew that it would be really, really cool to be an announcer. But this was pre-cable TV.
Yeah.
And this was before women's sports became a big television option. So trying to become a broadcaster back in the late 80s, early 90s was a totally different thing than it is now. Without the internet, without, all these different forms. You think about it now, you can watch 18 different games and probably 11 different sports every single night of the week.
It's wild.
Women, men, sometimes, whatever. Specialty athletes, everyone. It's on TV, it's on radio, someone's holding a microphone and talking about it. But that wasn't the case before. So I was a little bit apprehensive about how realistic this could be, but I took baby steps and baby steps and baby steps, and eventually, just by not giving up, I eventually got into the world of sports and holding a microphone.
So you go to St. Lawrence College?
I did. A small school upstate New York.
Canton, New York, is that right?
Canton, New York. It's the only school I got into. I applied to 3 schools.
3 schools?
Yeah, I was delusional. I applied to Stanford. I didn't get in. They laughed at me. And I applied to some small school in Maine called Bates. I thought that I'd get in there. That was actually technically my safety school.
You didn't want to stay close to home there?
I didn't. I have an older sister who was really smart, and she went east. And for some reason, I just thought that going to a school in the Northeast was something that was the right thing to do. So I was going to go somewhere northeast and go to a small liberal arts school, and that's what I did. And the only one that accepted me was St. Lawrence.
What did you major in?
Philosophy.
Okay. Well, now I'm okay. Some of this is starting to make sense now.
Yeah,
some of this is starting to come together.
And my parents both said, just don't worry about your major. Do what you want to do. Enjoy your 4 years, and then both my parents had graduate degrees as well. So it was kind of they were pushing me towards not even worrying about undergraduate degrees, but think about graduate school. And I don't know. Everyone in my family is very good at filling out paperwork to get grants, and scholarships and all that kind of stuff. My parents and my sister were all wonderful in the terms of trying to figure out different ways to skin a cat. And so there was both my sister and I had all these wonderful opportunities to go to school because of some of the options that are out there sometimes in terms of monies and scholarships and grants. And
See, my sister was the same. My oldest sister was the same way. Super smart. One of the top of her class when she graduated high school. Went to all her life wanted to go to Chapel Hill. Got into Chapel Hill like it was nothing, and actually didn't like it, oddly enough, and transferred to Campbell, which is a great school as well. Fred Whitfield is a
Yep.
Campbell alum. So yeah, but she was the same way coming out of high school. If there was the most obscure scholarship or grant you could ever find, she applied for it.
Sure.
And she got a lot of her school paid for because she was willing to search everything out. And I got to give it to her because my parents probably wish I had that same sort of work ethic in terms of looking for that stuff. But it's out there.
Oh, it's totally out there. And I think that's one of the kind of injustices in the world is I don't think that everyone understands the accessibility of help to kind of get you through schools because it certainly helped me and changed my life around as well as my sister.
So when you go to St. Lawrence, you graduate with philosophy, you go to Cuse.
I went to Syracuse.
For your master's degree.
It was a 1.5-year program, and back when I went there, and actually still to this day, it was a huge name in the world of broadcasting.
No, it's the school. It's Broadcaster U.
And it's relatively close to St. Lawrence. St. Lawrence is 2 hours north of Syracuse. So I spent 4 years.
So you're actually getting less snow when you go to Syracuse for you.
Oh, my God, yes. Balmy.
Everybody else is complaining like, oh, this is great. This is summer vacation for me.
So I went to Syracuse, and I did this intense 18-month program. I will say that I think that the undergraduate program at Syracuse is totally different than the graduate program. The great thing about Syracuse is they have access to hands-on experience. WAER is kind of like the breeding ground for all of these great broadcasters. I never had access to that just because it's seniority-based. And so if you go in your freshman year and you're a sophomore, junior, senior, you get a chance to do games and kind of help out. But I didn't have that length of time to kind of get my feet wet and kind of get in that stuff. So Syracuse was great being there and surrounding myself with other people who were go-getters and who were going to be in this business.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was at IMG College, we had a lot of Cuse guys that would come down after they would graduate. We were all at 20-somethings working for nothing, but we were working in college sports and we were working in broadcasting, and man, was it fun. We couldn't believe we were getting to do this. And they came out so polished. So polished. Now, App has a great broadcasting program that keeps getting even better because it's hands-on as well. We have WASU up in Boone, and it's run like a commercial radio station. It's treated as a commercial radio station, and it's the only way you get better is to treat yourself like a pro before you are a pro. But I remember the competitive nature in that environment alone of trying to measure up to those guys, those young broadcasters. And as you said, there's ego in this business, and that's completely okay to where you'd say, well, I'm better than you, or I'm every bit as good as you. And just because you went to Syracuse and maybe you think I went to Little Appalachian State, and it made us better, though. And it wasn't a contentious thing. It wasn't even anything that was vile or nasty or anything like that. It was a good thing because iron sharpens iron. And we used to critique each other. We'd do weekly air check sessions of our scoreboard updates. We'd have fun late night games or doing West Coast Pac-12 games, and somebody would throw out a word. You had to work that word into your scoreboard update. And not in a weird way, but in a way where you just slipped it in there, right? And it made us better broadcasters, and that was so much fun. Like, it was a proving grounds of, I want to see how good you are. And we'd push each other and challenge each other, and I have all the love in the world for Syracuse because they equip their broadcasters for this business as well as anybody.
Yeah, it's for a long time, most of the jobs that I ever got, I was serendipitously, there was a Syracuse person involved, I worked
Syracuse Mafia. They're everywhere.
I worked as a general assignment news reporter on the TV side at the CBS affiliate in Rochester, New York. That was really my first job, and the person who hired me was a Syracuse alum. And then I came back to Chicago, and I got hired at the time it was called Sports Channel Chicago, and the person who hired me was a Syracuse alum.
They're everywhere.
I slid over to the NBC affiliate in Chicago, and my executive producer was a Syracuse alum. And then I got into ESPN, and coordinated producer Ed Placey meant the world to me and pushed me forward. And he was a Syracuse alum. Even when I got out with Los Angeles Dodgers, I took the Los Angeles Dodgers job, and there's 4 people in the room interviewing me, and one of the people happened to be a Syracuse alum. So it's not just the on-air talent, it's also the executives in the business. And so that's really kind of where it helped for me.
The behind-the-scenes people make this industry.
Yeah.
And they don't get enough attention sometimes. But the producers that get us on the air, or the people that are feeding us things that, man, how did they know that, or how did they work that in? There's always people behind the scenes. Those people are invaluable. Your first job, because I'll tell you mine, what was your first job right out of college, even if you were making pennies, where you thought, I don't care, it's broadcasting, and I'm working?
Yeah,
remember that?
I moved to Chicago after I graduated from Syracuse, and I just moved to Chicago just because I figured it was a big market. I was kind of a Midwestern guy, and my best friend was already out there. And I just waited tables for a year and a half. And I would go to the Harold Washington Library in downtown Chicago because I didn't have, no one had a computer back then. And they had word processors.
What year is this?
This would have been 1992.
Okay.
And so I would go to these word processors, and I would type out these resumes and cover letters, and I would physically mail them to people. And I would do that twice a week, and I did that for a year and a half. Finally, and during that time period, people would give me interviews, and I met people, and it was great. But the first job that I got was $6 an hour. I was answering phones at a radio station called The Score in Chicago.
Yeah, 670, right?
It's one of the first all sports stations. And at the time, it was still sun up to sundown. So it was
What's their call letters? I'm a big call letter guy. Are they WCSR?
You got them mixed around a little bit.
WSCR.
SCR,
yeah.
Yep. And they were just going to they weren't going to go 24 hours yet, but they were going to add like an extra 6 hours. And so they needed someone else to man the phones. So I answered phones. I was called technically, I think, the associate producer, but all I was a phone answer. And I did that. And
do you remember what you were getting paid?
$6 an hour.
$6 an hour.
And as I was doing that, I got another phone call, and I was asked to be a low-level, non-union producer, a field producer at the NBC affiliate in Chicago, doing news. Back then, I wasn't doing sports. I was going to do news.
This is TV you're talking about.
This is TV.
Yeah.
And so I would go out, and I would start my day on Mondays at 5 o'clock in the morning, and there was this live shot. There would this morning show. They were having a cup of coffee with whoever was making news in Chicago that day. So it's called Coffee Cam. And so I would be the person who would go on site, and I would meet with Katarina Witt came to town, and she was doing the Skate on State in December. It was really cold, and she was going to be skating on State, and people could come and join her. And so she wanted to promote it. So we had a cup of coffee with her at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I was the person who woke up and got out with the live truck and the big masts and the radio waves. And we would sit her down and have a I wouldn't do it. I was behind the scenes, but I would make sure that she was able to look into the camera and where she'd hear our anchors. And so anyway, I produced that morning live shot, and then I'd stay the rest of the day, and I'd talk to Mayor Daley or whatever show that they needed help from. I'd go out and interview whoever I could find in Chicago that would fit that particular news element that they were trying to track down. Mm-hmm. So for about a year of my life, I worked every single day of the week. I worked Monday through Friday, about 5 in the morning until 6 o'clock at night at the NBC affiliate, 13 hours a day. And then on the weekend, I would work 6 hours a day, Saturday and Sunday morning, answering phones.
At the Score.
At the Score.
So when I first got out of school, this would have been 2010. Yeah, so this is what would have been the summer of 2010. Moved back home with my parents, moved back in the house. No shame. You got to do what you got to do. I was working in the grocery store, making ends meet. Same thing. I'm not just going to sit in my room all day. And so I did that. I was trying to talk to people. I had a buddy of mine, Bryce Johnson, who he's paying his own airtime on a religious station for a sports talk show. and there were probably 12 people listening, but it didn't matter. It was his vision, it was his passion, what he wanted to do. I said, Bryce, can I help you? He said, well, I don't have any money to pay you. I said, I don't need money. I'm working at the grocery store. I just want to help. And so we did that, and as luck would have it, 7:30 WZGV here in town, they were airing oldies on an AM station in 2010, which is terrible. And they flipped to sports, and we got a call. We found out about it because somebody knew that was happening and said, hey, you guys need to talk to these people. Maybe they'd take your show. And we convinced them to do it, but they weren't going to hire a producer. They had a local morning show. Bill Rosinski was going to host it. Bryce did his afternoon show, and I told the guy, Lanny Ford was his name, I said, Lanny, somebody's got to be here. Somebody's got to monitor the board. Even when we're syndicated, somebody's got to book guests. Somebody's got to be here to answer the phone. You beg and you plead. And I said, I don't need much money, so I can't probably afford to pay you more than this. And I said, I don't care. I'll take it. And I did that same thing for a year, and I would get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd drive in, do the show, book guests, do production, do imaging, cut spots, answer the phone if somebody was there, monitor the board. Bryce would do his show. I'd do the same thing for him. I'd come home, I'd book guests for the next day, and maybe I went to bed at 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'd get up and I'd do it again. And I did it for a year.
But you felt you were moving forward.
Right? Well, I probably wasn't, but I felt like I was. And I'll never forget this. IMG, I was doing some part-time work for them, studio hosting, making same thing, nothing. Not even worth the gas money to drive up to Winston-Salem and back a few times a week. But it was on KLAC in L.A. I was doing UCLA basketball with Chris Roberts, okay, and Tracy Murray. I freaking watched Tracy Murray in the NBA, right? And so it was like I couldn't believe I was doing this, even though nobody knew who I was. And they called me and they said, hey, we've never hired a full-time producer. We want to hire one. And they said, here's what we're offering. And to me, it felt like they might have been paying me $1 million, right? And I'll never forget this. I called Bill Rosinski. I said, Bill, you won't believe this. Somebody offered me a full-time job. And he said, oh, that's great. I knew that was going to happen. He said, so what'd you tell him? I said, I told him I had to think about it. He said, are you crazy? Are you crazy? He said, why did you say that? I said, well, I love Charlotte, Bill. I don't want to leave Charlotte. He said, did they offer you benefits? I said, yeah. He said, oh, you take that job. So I called him I hung up the phone, called him right back. I said, I'll take it. I'm sorry I didn't say that right away. The things you need to do that first, whatever that grind is right out of college, but it always leads to something. It always leads to something.
A grind. That's what you're talking about. I'm telling you, it's. I always think that anyone can really do this job. You got to have a modicum of talent. But the biggest talent is what you need to do to hold a microphone and be a broadcaster to get the job. That's what you need to do to actually keep the job. You got to network, you got to have a little bit of social skills, and you got to be tenacious. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that will help you throughout your course of your career. So it's kind of like a weeding out process. And that's what I tell kids all the time is it's amazing. You start and you think that the world is against you and there's just no possible way. There's 1,000 other kids who want this exact same job. Yeah, that's probably true. But after a year, all those 1,000 kids, 800 have decided to do something random, and they just don't want to do it. They want to have enough money to go on a date on a Friday night, or they want to have a girlfriend, or they want to have a boyfriend.
They should have been gifted a job because, hey, I'm really good and talented and people just can't see it, right?
Nope. Yep. So all of a sudden 800 people are gone and you're still competing with 200 people, but you waited another 6 months and those people have all gone someplace else because they didn't need that or they didn't want that, so they weren't willing to make that sacrifice. So eventually you get manageable numbers if you kind of wait and if you try and if you continue to put yourself out there and if you do catch that lucky break. But you got to be ready for that lucky break.
Talk some hoops for a little bit, and then we'll wrap up. So you have a unique experience. You're uniquely qualified to talk about this right here, where I hear fans say, oh, the NBA, we already know who's going to win the championship before the league year ever starts, and why do we even bother? And I just think we have such a short-term memory because you worked on the broadcast for the last Bulls championship, correct? 98?
I did.
So you remember those Bulls teams, who in my opinion were every bit as good as this Warriors team is right now. And those were my formative years as an NBA fan growing up. And those Knicks teams were good. Those Pacers teams were good. Those Jazz teams and Rockets teams and Sonics teams and Suns teams were good. But I never once thought at any point were any of those teams going to actually upset or overturn or topple over the Chicago Bulls either before the NBA Finals or let alone when they got to the NBA Finals. Now, there was drama. Some of those series were really close. But I think it might have been, you'd remember better, 97 or 98. The Jazz in a single game, I think they scored like 52 points in a finals game. So we have this revisionist history, in my opinion, of what the NBA was back then. There were a lot of other teams that were really, really good. The Bulls were always the Bulls. So is it any different now, fast forward 20 years? Is it any different between what the Bulls did and what the Warriors are doing?
Well, the Bulls never played a Game 7. Like the Bulls, when Michael won his 6 championships, they never even went to a Game 7 because it was never even that close going down the stretch. And they did, it was, you're right, it was the Portland Trailblazers, it was the Seattle Sonics, it was the Phoenix Suns, it was Utah a couple of times. So they kind of made their way, the Portland Trailblazers. They kind of went through the who's who of the West. But I disagree with what you say, when you're comparing the Warriors to what the Bulls did back then. That was an organic Bulls team that drafted Michael, that drafted Scotty, that, took a chance on Dennis Rodman.
That's true.
And they pushed together and they became something together. You talk about, a team that just, wow. The Golden State Warriors, I'll give them all the respect in the world. They're a wonderful team and they play wonderful basketball and they're so much fun to watch. But I still think that Chicago Bulls run back in the 90s, it was like nothing I'll ever see again in my life.
I do agree with that. I guess my question to you is, do you think truly the gap between 1 and 2 as in 3 and 4 in the NBA is as wide now compared to how it was then? Because I feel like, again, there is a revisionist history of what was jumbled together at the top now versus then. I feel like people say there's such a wide gulf, it's never been wider, but I don't know. I feel like that's always the NBA, right? Generally speaking, when you have dynastic teams, they're in a class unto their own, however they're built, and then you've got 2, 3 other teams who are trying to, they're reaching, they're grasping upward, but they just don't have enough, however good they are. Is that fair or no?
I think that's fair. I think that as much as the Bulls dominated throughout the course of their run, there were legitimate opportunities for Indiana that had a good club at the time, legitimate opportunities for the Knicks, who were pretty darn good for a while. The Cleveland Cavaliers, back in the early part of the run, with Brad Daugherty and Mark Price and Hot Rod Williams and Larry Nance and Ron Harper. I still can't get over the fact that they traded Ron Harper for Danny Ferry. Oh, my God, that just guts me. And they got rid of Dell, too. Yeah. My goodness, I love Del Curry in the Cleveland Cavaliers uniform. And I'm not sure on this, and I wasn't there for the inner workings, but my memory was that getting ready for the expansion draft, the Cavs had to protect, I don't remember, 7 or 8 players, but on paper, it looked as if they chose to keep Craig Elo and not Del Curry. They were both playing similar positions. And so Craig Elo stayed around, and Craig was a heck of an NBA player. Most people just remember it because Michael hit the shot on top of him. But, man, if Dell was only in Cleveland 1 year, but just with that outside stroke of his, man, if he was a Cleveland Cavalier, maybe something would have changed with. But then again, we're happy to have him down here in Charlotte forever.
I don't complain about that.
Such a huge member.
Same thing, Muggsy was a number 12 overall pick, I believe, the year before by the Bullets, and they didn't secure him. Out of Wake Forest, very good young point guard, and he struggled. He was up and down as a rookie because that's what you do as a rookie. And that's crazy in hindsight, too. How did you not protect a lottery pick from the previous year? And those are your 2 longest tenured Hornets after that. So that's wild. And I think, I don't know, the thing with the Warriors, too, I find interesting, Eric, and I'll be interested to see, we all will be, how Carmelo will work with them this year. We forget, before Chris Paul went down, they were up 3-2. Right, playing a Game 6 deciding game at home, and they just didn't seal it. So I think the Warriors, I'm not saying none of us would predict they could lose, but they could lose. We almost saw them lose last year. It's there for the taking at times. But that's what you got to do against great teams, right? You got to seize the opportunities, and yeah, it's hard to do against a team like that.
I don't think Cleveland is ever going to win this past spring, but Cleveland should have won game 1.
Should have won game 1.
They should have won game 1.
What happens if they win game 1?
If you steal game 1, all of a sudden you've got home court advantage. LeBron was playing at an unbelievable level. Whether or not he broke his hand post-game hitting the clipboard, who knows? But Golden State almost lost game 1, and that could have changed anything. And a couple of years ago, back when Kyrie Irving was hurt and back when Kevin Love was hurt, the Cavaliers had a lead in the series against Golden State. This is before they won their championship. But Golden State's not infallible. It does seem with Kevin Durant there that things are slanted in their favor.
And they kind of are, but yeah.
No doubt about it, they are.
Yeah.
But it is possible. And I would love I'd love to see someone challenge the Warriors this year. And, I want everyone to be healthy throughout the course of the year. But I'd love to see another great challenge, and I think it'd be great for the NBA.
We look at the East. I think Boston they deserve all the credit in the world for what they've built. I hope that Gordon Hayward's healthy, because that was gruesome to see what happened to him in the first 5 minutes of the year last year. And they are, I think, in a class unto themselves, maybe in the East. But now LeBron's gone out west. Mm-hmm. I think Toronto's going to be said for something when it's all said and done. Philly's interesting to me. I'll say this. Philly ended on what? How many straight wins at the end of last year?
Oh, goodness.
18, 20?
It was high teens.
So their record's a little skewed. You got to give them credit for that win streak, but they were a 500 team at the All-Star break, near it, as we were.
Well, but they're a young team that was just figuring it out.
They were young,
so maybe this is who they are now. It's not.
But they've lost.
That's the new normal.
They added. Markelle Fultz is going to be a big X factor for them. Obviously, I don't know. Indiana's a team that I've got a lot of appreciation for what Indiana's built.
I know this sounds goofy, but I kind of think they're going to miss Lance Stevenson.
You think so?
Whenever they get rid of Lance Stevenson, they always take a dip.
No, that is true.
Yeah.
But Tyreek Evans might fill that role. I don't know. Maybe not in the crazy factor.
Yeah, that's the whole plan. I think they kind of need the crazy factor. I think that helps them. But no, Oladipo is a tremendous player. They're going to be fun to watch. But
Sabonis is very good for them.
I just thought that it was kind of a really good matchup for them against Cleveland. Mm-hmm. Remember, they took 3 out of 4 in the regular season against Cleveland. So that just is a good matchup for them.
So how do you see the East then? Because I feel like, in my opinion, Boston, Toronto, Philly, and then I think there is a tight, maybe not as tight as it was 3 years ago, but I think there's a tight gap between maybe 4 to 10. I think those teams could be all separated by, 4 to 6 games even.
I think, to me, it's not a foregone conclusion that Boston's the number one team in the East. I think that Philadelphia, I love their young players. I love Embiid. I love Simmons. And I think that Fultz, he was picked number one for a reason, And guys who are 6'5", with his type of ups, with his length, even if he can't shoot the ball from distance, he is the prototypical athletic wing that everyone's searching for nowadays. And he's talented, too. He's still super young, so we don't know where we're going to get out of him. I think that Philadelphia has a chance to be the best team in the East. I'm not sold on Toronto. I think that DeMar DeRozan was for someone who averages 27 points a game and has been a perennial all-star, he's still underrated for what he was providing to that team. Just thinking that Kawhi Leonard is going to go and be an improvement, I think, is a little bit disingenuous. Guy played what? Did he play 10 games last year?
No, he did not.
And his game is predicated on defense, and defense is predicated on health. And you start getting leg injuries, and I'm going to need to see it before I'm a believer that Toronto's a better team with Kawhi Leonard.
That's fair.
If you're not healthy to play, more than a handful of games one year, what makes you think you're going to just turn on your motor again and be a top 5 player again? That's asking a lot, so we'll see about them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You look at teams like, again, Indiana, Miami, us.
We haven't mentioned Milwaukee.
Milwaukee's another team, although they're interesting because they've got talent. Their talent seems to maybe not fit as well as they've...
Right. I wasn't a big believer in them cutting bait with Jabari Parker.
Yeah, it didn't make sense to me.
I think Jabari is just too young and too good of a player with too much of an upside to not commit long term.
The Bulls, I think they're still a little too young, but that Jabari Parker move, I don't think you can state how big that is to sign him.
Yes.
And what that does to move a roster forward to add a veteran piece like that. So,
look, and what about in Cleveland? They're actually not tearing it down. They're actually trying to win.
I appreciate that. I admire that, and I think Kevin Love's going to look like Minnesota Timberwolves Kevin Love this year. That's my thought.
I'm curious about that because his body doesn't look like Minnesota Timberwolves Kevin Love anymore. He used to be a little bit doughy.
Yeah, and now he plays more on the outside as opposed to down low. He used to be more of a presence, right off the block. But, yeah, and I think Colin Sexton's got some Donovan Mitchell stuff in him in as much as they might just let him throw efficiency out the door, just let everything run through him, and he'll just be able to run their offense and get a lot of shots up. And if you do that, I don't know, they could be a fringe playoff team, I think. They're in that mix. East is going to be fun. I think
it is going to be fun. I think Atlanta's not going to be very good, but they've got Trae Young, who I think everyone's really excited to see. And I love that John Collins has a jumping jack who can get to the rim and do whatever he wants. So it's going to be fun. But I do think that the Hornets, I think the 36-win seasons of the last 2 years, I think those are a little bit of a smokescreen to what this team really is at its core.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not that difficult. Each of the last 2 years, this is like is mathematically almost impossible. But each of the last 2 years, the Hornets have actually scored as many points as they've given up totally throughout the course of the year. Yeah. Yet they finished 12 games below 500.
Their scoring differential is not on par with what their record would indicate. Yeah.
Which would lead you to believe that they're not that far away.
You're losing in the margins is what you're doing there.
Yes. So I think that small changes, big changes, could be all that the Hornets need. New philosophy, new faces, just a couple of tweaks here and there. They're not that far away.
I'll give you this, and this is how we'll wrap up. It was very clear when Steve Clifford took over 5 years ago as head coach that he saw Kemba Walker as the way out for this team. This is a team that needed to take a step forward. This is our point guard. He's a lottery pick. He's got all the talent in the world. Let's hone in on that, right? And it was the greatest movie ever made because it worked. It was the truth. Now, Al Jefferson was a big part of that too, some other guys over the years. But Kemba Walker was the tide that lifted all boats under Steve Clifford. And he still should for this Hornets team. Just being around a little bit, I think Malik Monk, if I can make the analogy here, Malik Monk is going to be to James Borrego what Kemba Walker was to Steve Clifford. And you can see it already. Building confidence. Look, you were around the team as much as anybody last year, Eric. I don't think people truly understood how many different directions Malik Monk was getting pulled. You get people telling you you're great. You get people tearing you down, saying you're not any good. Are you a point guard? Are you not a point guard? Should I play? Should I not play? Is it better to get on the floor and make mistakes and learn from them, or sit on the bench and observe from afar? It's a hard job to be a rookie in an 82-game schedule in the NBA, especially when you got a team trying to vie for the playoffs. I think James Borrego is going to have that sort of relationship with Malik Monk that Steve Clifford had with Kemba Walker, and I think because of it, that's the sort of X factor that I think can lift this team to another level.
Amen. I'd love it. I do think that, Malik Monk is, when you're looking at the ways the Hornets can get better quickly, Malik Monk is someone that stands out like a sore thumb. He's got talent. That's never been questioned.
His shooting stroke is so pure. So pure.
But he's got bounce, too. Yeah. That's one of the things that you didn't notice a lot beginning of the year because I think he was dragging a little bit, the preseason injury. But
do you remember
he'll be the first person to tell you he's got a 44-inch vertical.
The dunk on the baseline in United Center late in the year. That was the game he really exploded. What went through your head when you were calling that afterwards? what do you remember? Processing all that?
I remember this joy because I didn't know that he had that, and that kind of changed my perception of him as being a catch and shoot type of guy. I know he's the guy who's working on his handle. He's a point guard. He's a two. What is he? So he's working on that. But what we did see was his confidence in his offensive game. He's got a mid-range game. He can pull up. He can do a lot of different things. But the things that I didn't see were the two extremes. I didn't see him close to the basket finishing, and I didn't see him out in the front court initiating offense. So whenever he did small things that lead me to believe that he could be more than just a shooter or a spot-up guy or a guy who got in the paint and shot a floater, that made me really excited to know that that is the possibility. And the fact that the guy has springs in his legs, man, being a 20-year-old kid who can shoot it from distance and who could also get to the rim, that's... I'd harken back to the old Rex Chapman days, man.
Oh, no doubt. And here's where we'll end because you're a trivia buff. So my favorite, I'll ask you, do you have a favorite Hornets trivia nugget? Is there something that, because it's either strange or bizarre, maybe not widely known?
I should have prepared for this one.
Okay. I'll give you mine.
Have anything on hand. Okay.
Are you ready for this? And this one isn't too crazy, but I think even a lot of diehard fans wouldn't know this. The all-time leader in triple-doubles in Hornets history.
Oh, hold on. I'll get that.
You know who it is. For you, it's a layup.
It's Anthony Mason.
Yes. But I don't think that's very well known amongst even the most diehard and ardent Hornets fans.
And two is Nick, right? Nick's closing on his tail.
Yeah, I think Anthony's at 7. I believe Nick is at 6 after last year, so he's one behind tying him. And that'll probably fall this year. But Anthony Mason, I've said this, if you were taking a big to play in today's NBA, Anthony Mason, could you imagine him? He'd be Draymond Green in today's NBA.
No doubt about it.
He'd be Draymond Green.
No doubt about it.
Oh, he'd be so good.
When Anthony Mason played for the Knicks, he was given free reign to just do whatever he wanted to do, and that was just mind-blowing for so many different people.
Oh, he was a terror down low. He'd take you off the dribble. He'd post you up off the block. His shooting ability was great.
I wasn't here during the 90s, but I saw a whole bunch of Hornets basketball during the 90s because I would come into town with the Bulls, and the Hornets would come to Chicago. And I always thought the Hornets were just so much fun to watch. They always had just great wing plays. It wasn't just Dell. But the Glenn Rices of the world.
Scotty Burrell. Oh, I love
Scott Burrell. My goodness. Also had a 94-mile-an-hour fastball, too.
Okay. Hersey Hawkins.
The Hawk was terrific. Sure. But, yeah, Anthony Mason. There's a lot of wonderful players, distinctive players. Unfortunately, no one has ever really more than a 2 or 3 year stint at a time because it seems as if there's a bunch of stops and starts. But there's been a lot of names and wonderful players over the years of the Hornets, and I'm hoping that this year is another year that the Hornets can make some more names and get back to the playoffs.
EC, it's good to see you, man.
Hey, congratulations on the gig. We're going to blast.
Episode 14 of Courtside Seats in the books with the TV voice for your Charlotte Hornets, Eric Collins. So it's cool for both of us to kind of catch up and get ready for the season. And we'll be here with training camp coming up in a few weeks. Again, our preseason opener is going to be on the 28th up in Chapel Hill at the Dean Dome. And we'll get things started against the Boston Celtics. So we're literally weeks away from seeing this Hornets team take shape under new head coach James Borrego. You can check out the podcast almost anywhere podcasts are available. iHeartRadio, Stitcher. You can find us on Spotify, of course, YouTube, on our official YouTube channel for the Charlotte Hornets. You can search Charlotte Hornets. You could search Courtside Seats. Subscribe there. You'll get pushed all of our great content. Former podcasts are up there. And then also find us an Apple Podcasts. Just search the same stuff. You could search my name too, Kroeger, Kroeger. And in doing so, you'll find us. Leave a review. Rate us if you don't mind, and click subscribe. You'll get pushed all the new episodes. We'll see you guys back here next week, right here on Courtside Seats.